The stories shared on this channel are fictional and created solely for entertainment. Any similarity to real events, individuals, or locations is entirely coincidental.
Welcome to Unseen Power. We hope you enjoy the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts by leaving a comment below the video.
Sir, you need to move. Now! For a moment, no one breathed. The hum of the aircraft idling at the gate seemed to drop in pitch, as if the plane itself sensed what had just been said. Conversations froze mid-sentence. A champagne flute hovered inches from a woman's lips. Somewhere behind the curtain, a carry-on thudded into an overhead bin. Too loud, too late. Ethan Brooks sat perfectly still in seat 2A. He was 42, tall but not imposing, dressed in a charcoal blazer that had seen better days, no flashy watch, no designer logos begging for recognition. His hands rested calmly on the armrests, fingers relaxed, knuckles loose. He had boarded early, scanned his boarding pass without incident, thanked the gate agent by name, and settled into the window seat he had chosen weeks ago for the legroom and the quiet. He had done everything right. Lauren Mitchell stood over him, 30 years old, crisp navy uniform, hair pulled tight at the nape of her neck. Her smile was thin, professional on the surface, strained underneath. One heel tapped once against the carpet, sharp and impatient. She did not ask again. She did not lower her voice. "This seat is reserved," she said, slower now, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "We need to accommodate another passenger." Ethan looked up. Not startled, not defensive, just curious. "I believe this is my seat," he said evenly. His voice was calm, low, controlled. The kind of voice that didn't rush because it didn't need to. He reached into his jacket, produced his boarding pass, and held it out between two fingers. Seat 2. A. First class. Lauren barely glanced at it. Behind her, the aisle shifted. A presence filled the space. Victoria Hale stepped forward. 55, immaculate, cream-colored suit tailored within an inch of its life. Hair sculpted, not styled. A handbag rested in the crook of her arm, like a status symbol rather than an accessory. Her eyes moved over Ethan the way one scans a stain on expensive fabric, irritation mixed with disbelief. She checked her watch. Slowly, deliberately. "I always sit here," she said. Not to Ethan, not really to Lauren either, but to the cabin itself. Her voice carried. It was meant to. On this route, every time. The airline knows that. A murmur rippled through the rows, subtle, curious, judgment forming in real time. Ethan felt it. The shift, the way the air tightened around him. He had felt it his entire life. Lauren cleared her throat. "Mr. Brooks," she said, finally reading the name, mispronouncing it just slightly. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in another seat. We can arrange something. More comfortable." Ethan studied her face, the way her eyes flicked past him, already anticipating compliance. The expectation baked into her posture. He had seen that look in hotel lobbies, in boardrooms before his title was known, in places where access was quietly policed by assumptions. "I'm comfortable here," he said. "This is the seat I paid for." Victoria exhaled sharply, an exaggerated sound of disbelief. "This is ridiculous," she said. "I have a connection to make. I don't have time for confusion." Her gaze locked onto Ethan now, sharp and appraising. "Surely there's been a mistake." A mistake. The word hung there, heavy. Lauren's smile tightened. Her shoulders squared. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice, but not enough. "Sir, we're trying to resolve this quickly. This passenger is one of our most loyal clients." Ethan didn't miss the emphasis. Loyal. Most. Client. "And I'm not?" he asked softly. Lauren didn't answer. Instead, she straightened and glanced toward the front of the cabin. A signal. Silent. Understood. A few rows back, a man lifted his phone just a little higher, pretending to scroll. Across the aisle, a woman stopped sipping her drink, eyes fixed, unblinking. Ethan felt the familiar calculation happening around him. Who belonged? Who didn't? Who would be believed? He thought of the airport security footage from earlier that morning, though he didn't know it existed yet. How he'd paused to help an elderly woman with her suitcase. How he'd joked with the barista, left a generous tip, thanked her twice. None of it visible now. None of it relevant. What mattered was how he looked in this seat. Lauren spoke again, firmer. "If you could just gather your things." "No," Ethan said. The word was quiet. Absolute. It landed harder than shouting ever could. Victoria's eyes widened, just slightly. Not shock. Offense. The kind that comes from being contradicted by someone you didn't expect to speak up. "Excuse me," she said. Ethan turned to her fully now. He met her gaze. Held it. "This is my assigned seat," he said. "If there's an issue, I'm happy to discuss it with a supervisor." A beat. Then Victoria laughed. Not humor. Dismissal. "This is unbelievable," she said, shaking her head. "People like you always want to make everything difficult." The words slipped out easily. Practiced. Comfortable. Lauren flinched, just a little. But she didn't correct her. Didn't intervene. Instead, she nodded once as if a decision had been made somewhere beyond Ethan's reach. "I'll get my supervisor," she said. She turned on her heel and walked away. Ethan watched her go. The back of her uniform. The rigid line of her spine. He felt the eyes on him now from every direction. Some sympathetic, some annoyed, some already convinced he was the problem. He inhaled slowly through his nose. Exhaled. He had flown millions of miles in his life. Sat in rooms where decisions reshaped industries. Signed documents that moved markets. And yet here, in a leather seat worth more than some people's monthly rent, he was being weighed and found lacking by strangers who knew nothing about him. Victoria reclaimed the aisle space, standing taller now, victorious before the battle had even begun. She leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough to feel intimate. "You should save yourself the embarrassment," she said. "Take the other seat." Ethan looked out the window. The runway stretched ahead, endless concrete under a pale morning sky. Engines rumbled. A plane taxied past, oblivious. Embarrassment. He smiled faintly. Not for her, for himself. What none of them knew, what not one person in that cabin could have imagined, was that this moment, this quiet pressure, this calculated dismissal had already set something in motion that would not stop when the plane doors closed. They thought this was about a seat. They thought they were in control. They had no idea who was sitting in 2A. Daniel Ross arrived with the confidence of a man who expected obedience before explanation. He was 45, broad-shouldered, jaw set, tie perfectly centered, as if authority itself had dressed him that morning. His shoes made no sound on the carpet, but the space around him shifted anyway. Lauren stepped aside the moment she saw him, relief flickering across her face. "This passenger is refusing to move," she said quickly, the words already shaped to sound reasonable. "We have a priority situation." Daniel didn't look at Ethan right away. He looked at the seat. 2A, then at Victoria Hale, who met his gaze with a tight smile that said everything without saying a word. Daniel nodded once. A decision, not an acknowledgement. "Sir," he said at last, turning to Ethan. His tone was measured, practiced, edged with impatience. "We need you to relocate to another seat so we can accommodate a VIP guest." Ethan didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't frown. "I've already shown my boarding pass," he said. "This is my seat." Daniel exhaled through his nose, a short breath that barely hid his irritation. "I understand that's what your ticket says, but we have discretion in these matters." Discretion. The word slid into the air like a quiet threat. A woman 2 rows back leaned toward her husband. "Is he serious?" she whispered. "Not quiet enough." Victoria crossed her arms, satisfaction blooming beneath her irritation. "I don't see why this is so complicated," she said. "I fly this route every week. They know me." Daniel nodded again, more deferential this time. "Yes, ma'am. We're handling it." He turned back to Ethan, stepping closer. Close enough now that Ethan could smell the faint bite of coffee on his breath, the starch in his shirt collar. "Sir," Daniel said, lowering his voice, "we can do this the easy way, or the hard way." The cabin went still. Ethan felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Not fear. Recognition. The memory of 100 similar moments layered over each other. He looked up at Daniel, eyes steady. "I'm not moving," he said, "and I'd like you to explain clearly what policy I'm violating." Daniel's jaw flexed. A muscle jumped near his temple. This was not how this was supposed to go. "You're creating a disturbance," Daniel said. Ethan glanced around. At the passengers sitting silently. At the phones half raised. At his own still hands resting on the armrests. "I'm sitting," he said. Quietly. A man across the aisle shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. "He's not wrong," he muttered, then looked away when Daniel's eyes snapped toward him. Lauren took a step forward. "Sir, please," she said, voice strained now. "We're just trying to get everyone settled so we can depart on time." Ethan felt the pressure closing in, subtle and relentless. Time. Schedule. Everyone else's inconvenience placed neatly on his shoulders. Victoria checked her watch again. "This is unbelievable," she said. "I'm missing meetings because of this." Daniel straightened, his patience thinning. "This is your final request," he said. "Gather your belongings and move to the seat we assign you." Ethan leaned back slightly, resting his head against the seat for a brief second. The leather was cool, smooth. He closed his eyes, just long enough to steady his breathing. When he opened them, his voice was calm, but something had hardened beneath it. "If you remove me," he said, "I want it on record why." Daniel scoffed. "You're not in a position to make demands." Ethan met his gaze. "I'm in a position to ask questions." That was when Daniel smiled. Not warmth, not reassurance. The smile of someone who believed the system would back him, no matter what. He turned sharply toward the front of the cabin. "Captain!" he called. A low murmur swept through the passengers as the cockpit door opened. Michael Turner stepped out, all authority and silver hair, his uniform immaculate. 58 years old, thousands of flight hours behind him, the kind of man whose voice usually ended arguments before they began. "What's going on?" the captain asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. "We have a passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions." Michael's eyes landed on Ethan. He assessed him quickly. The clothes, the posture, the lack of visible agitation. His gaze flicked to Victoria, then back. "Sir," Michael said, voice firm, neutral. "My crew tells me there's an issue." Ethan looked up at him. "There's no issue with my ticket," he said. "I'm being asked to give up my assigned seat for another passenger's preference." Michael frowned slightly. "Our crew has the authority to reassign seats when necessary." "Necessary for whom?" Ethan asked. Silence stretched. Victoria laughed under her breath. "This is absurd." Michael's expression tightened. "Sir," he said, "if you continue to resist, we'll have to involve security." There it was, the escalation, the weight of uniformed power pressing down. Ethan felt the eyes on him again, some pleading now, some irritated, a few quietly furious on his behalf. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket. Lauren stiffened. Daniel's hand twitched. Ethan pulled out his phone. "I'm going to record this," he said, his voice steady. "For my own protection." Daniel stepped forward instinctively. "That's not allowed." "It is," Ethan said. "As long as I'm not interfering with crew duties." Michael hesitated. Just a fraction of a second, enough for doubt to slip in. Too late. Daniel turned toward the galley and spoke into the service phone, his back rigid, his gestures sharp. Ethan couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. He knew what was coming. A woman near the window wiped at her eyes. "This is wrong," she whispered. Victoria stood taller now, victorious in advance. She adjusted her handbag, smoothed her jacket, already settling into the future she assumed was guaranteed. Minutes passed, heavy, loaded. Then the sound of footsteps. 2 airport security officers boarded the plane. Their presence sucked the air from the cabin. Conversations died instantly. Phones rose openly now, no pretense. The officers stopped beside Ethan's seat. "Sir," one of them said, professional but uneasy, "we're here to escort you off the aircraft." Ethan looked up at him. "On what grounds?" The officer glanced back toward Daniel and the captain. No answer came. "Am I being removed for sitting in my assigned seat?" Ethan asked. Michael spoke, his voice firmer now, defensive. "You're being removed for creating a disturbance." A ripple of disbelief moved through the cabin. "That's not true," someone said. "I'm recording this," another voice called. Ethan nodded once. Slowly. He gathered his things with deliberate care. Tablet closed, jacket folded over his arm, movements unhurried, dignified. As he stood, Victoria smiled. As he stepped into the aisle, Daniel watched closely, jaw clenched. Something uneasy beginning to coil in his stomach. As Ethan passed them, he paused for half a second, just enough to look Daniel in the eye. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Daniel scoffed, but the sound lacked conviction. Ethan walked off the plane with his head high, flanked by security, the weight of injustice heavy but familiar. Behind him, Victoria slid into seat 2A, exhaling in satisfaction. None of them noticed the message Ethan typed as soon as his feet hit the jet bridge, or the way his expression didn't show anger, only resolve. The jet bridge felt colder than the cabin, the fluorescent lights harsher, unforgiving. Ethan Brooks walked between the two security officers without resistance, his shoes tapping softly against the ribbed floor. Behind him, the aircraft door sealed shut with a hollow thud. The sound landed in his chest, heavier than he expected, like a door closing somewhere much deeper than metal and hinges. Passengers crowded the terminal windows, faces pressed close, phones raised, whispers chasing him as he emerged back into the gate area. He could hear fragments as he passed. That was messed up. What did he do? They just kicked him off. A man shook his head slowly. A woman stared at Ethan with something like apology in her eyes. One of the officers cleared his throat. "Sir," he said quietly, "no authority now. Just discomfort. If you'll wait here." Ethan nodded and stepped aside, placing his bag at his feet. He didn't sit. He stood straight, shoulders squared, eyes forward. His phone buzzed once in his hand. He looked down. "Elena Park." He typed quickly. "Removed from Aerolux flight. Gate incident. Start documenting. Assemble legal and communications. Now." He hit send. Across the terminal, the departure board flickered. Flight status updated. On time. As if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't just been publicly erased. A few feet away, one of the security officers scrolled through his tablet, brow furrowing. "Sir," he said after a moment, lowering his voice, "can I ask what exactly happened back there?" Ethan looked at him. Really looked at him. The uncertainty in the man's eyes. The dawning realization. "I was asked to give up my seat," Ethan said. "I declined." "That's it?" "That's it." The officer swallowed. He glanced toward the plane, then back. "I'm sorry," he said. It sounded genuine. Too late, but genuine. Ethan nodded once. "I know." The officer stepped away, suddenly eager to be anywhere else. Ethan lifted his phone again. He opened the camera app, recording a voice memo, his tone calm, precise. Names, times, words spoken, gestures. He described Lauren's smile tightening, Daniel's phrasing, Victoria's money sliding into a uniform pocket. He left nothing out. His memory was sharp when it needed to be. A shadow fell across him. "Excuse me," a woman said. Ethan looked up. She was maybe mid-40s, hair pulled back, eyes bright with anger barely contained. She held her phone out, screen glowing. "I followed you off," she said. "I couldn't just sit there." She tapped the screen. Video played, clear, steady. The exchange, the threat, the money, the escort. "I got all of it," she said, "including her paying them." Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Not relief. Validation. "Thank you," he said. His voice softened, just a touch. "This matters." She nodded fiercely. "People need to see this." "They will," Ethan said. Inside the aircraft, the mood had changed. Lauren's hands trembled as she poured champagne. Daniel leaned against the galley counter, rubbing his forehead. Victoria reclined in 2A, smug satisfaction slowly curdling into unease as she noticed the phones still pointed in her direction. Whispers didn't stop just because Ethan was gone. A call chimed through the cabin phone. Daniel straightened. "Ross," he said, his face drained of color as he listened. "Yes, sir." "Yes, I understand." A pause. "We didn't know." He lowered the receiver slowly. Lauren watched him, dread pooling in her stomach. "What is it?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked down the aisle, at the passengers still filming, at Victoria, suddenly avoiding eye contact. "They want us grounded," he said finally. Lauren's breath caught. "Who?" Daniel swallowed. "Corporate." At Aerolux headquarters, 3 floors of glass and steel buzzed with controlled panic. Screens lit up with social media feeds, hashtags climbing, commentators speculating. The video replayed again and again. The optics were brutal, the narrative unmistakable. Richard Coleman stood at the head of the boardroom table, tie loosened, jacket discarded. 60 years old, decades of experience, and he had never seen a situation unravel this fast. "Who is he?" he asked, his voice low. The head of communications hesitated, then slid a folder across the table. "Ethan Brooks," she said, "founder and chief executive of Nova Core Technologies." The room went silent. Richard's eyes scanned the page. Net worth, holdings, influence. He closed his eyes briefly. "And the shares?" he asked. 25%, the CFO said, combined with partners, controlling interest. The weight of it settled over them all. Miles away, in a private airport lounge, Ethan sat at a table surrounded by laptops and focused faces. Elena stood beside him, scrolling through updates. Legal counsel dialed in. Communications drafted statements with surgical precision. "The video is at 2 million views and climbing," Elena said. "Major outlets are calling." Ethan nodded, eyes fixed on the screen. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry. He was calculating. "They made it public," he said. "We'll keep it that way." His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "Ethan Brooks." "Mr. Brooks," Richard Coleman said, voice strained but controlled. "This is Richard Coleman, Chief Executive Officer of Aerolux Airlines." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He let the silence stretch. Let the balance shift. "I'm listening," he said at last. "I want to personally apologize," Richard began. "What happened today was unacceptable. It does not reflect our values." Ethan's expression didn't change. "Values are what you do when you think no one important is watching," he said. "Today, your company showed me exactly who you are." A sharp inhale on the other end. "We'd like to make this right," Richard said. "Immediately." "You can start," Ethan said, "by convening an emergency board meeting." "Yes." "Of course. And placing everyone involved on administrative leave," Ethan continued. "Effective now." Richard hesitated. "Just a fraction." "Is that a problem?" Ethan asked. "No," Richard said quickly. "No, it isn't." "Good," Ethan said. "Then we'll talk." Back at the gate, Victoria Hale stared at her phone as notifications exploded. Her name, her face, her words. The comments were not kind. Lauren sat rigid in her jump seat, hands clasped so tightly her fingers ached. She replayed the moment in her mind. The money. The look she'd ignored. The choice she'd made. Daniel stood in the galley, staring at nothing. The plane hadn't moved. Outside, Ethan watched the aircraft through the glass, engines still silent. He felt the eyes of the world turning, the story expanding beyond him, beyond a seat, beyond one flight. This was bigger now, and for the first time since the confrontation began, the people who thought they held power understood something fundamental. They had removed the wrong man. The boardroom smelled faintly of coffee and panic. Screens along the glass walls flickered with the same frozen image, replayed again and again. Ethan Brooks, standing in the aisle, calm, unyielding, while uniformed authority closed in around him. No audio now, no commentary. Just the visual weight of it, the imbalance, the optics. Richard Coleman stood at the head of the table, hands braced against polished wood, eyes locked on the footage. Around him sat executives who had spent their careers managing turbulence. But nothing like this. This wasn't weather. This wasn't fuel prices or delayed parts. This was moral failure, captured in high definition. "How long?" Richard asked. "Under an hour," the head of communications said. Her voice was steady, but her fingers shook as she scrolled. "Major networks are cutting into programming. Civil rights groups are amplifying it. Celebrities are sharing it without commentary. That's the worst part. They're letting the video speak for itself." The CFO leaned forward. "Stock is already down 12% in pre-market trading." A sharp intake of breath moved around the table. "Analysts are projecting up to 30% by close if we don't act," he continued, "and that's assuming no additional footage surfaces." Another executive swallowed. "There's more footage?" The communications director nodded. "Multiple angles, including the cash exchange." Silence fell like a verdict. Richard straightened slowly. "Get me everyone involved," he said, "now, and prepare for the room." Back at the airport lounge, Ethan sat with his team, the world tightening around them like a lens coming into focus. Elena moved with quiet efficiency, assigning tasks, fielding calls, tracking the spread. The legal counsel spoke in measured tones about options, injunctions, exposure. The head of communications sketched scenarios on a tablet, each branching outcome colder than the last. Ethan listened. He absorbed. He didn't interrupt. His phone buzzed again. Text from Elena. Board meeting confirmed, in person. They want you there. Ethan nodded once. Good, he said. I'll be there. In the narrow conference room beneath the boardroom, Daniel Ross sat hunched forward, elbows on knees, staring at the floor. Lauren Mitchell sat beside him, hands clasped in her lap, eyes red but dry now. Captain Michael Turner leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, face drawn, decades of command reduced to waiting. The door opened. Human Resources entered with legal counsel and 2 security officers. The presence of security said everything. This wasn't a conversation. This was a consequence. We'll be brief, the HR director said, placing identical folders on the table. Your employment with Aerolux Airlines is terminated, effective immediately. Lauren's breath hitched. Daniel surged to his feet. This is insane, he said. We were following procedure. The HR director didn't blink. She opened her laptop and turned the screen toward them. The video played. Clear. Unforgiving. The money. The words. The silence when no one intervened. Procedure? She asked. Daniel's mouth opened, closed. Lauren's shoulders began to shake. I knew it was wrong, she whispered. I should have said something. Captain Turner closed his eyes. I trusted my crew, he said weakly. I didn't see the whole exchange. You saw enough, the HR director replied. You all did. She slid the folders forward. You'll be escorted to collect your personal belongings. Your final pay includes 2 weeks' severance. That's non-negotiable. As they were led out, heads turned. Whispers followed. The humiliation was swift, public, and absolute. A mirror held up to their own actions. Above them, the boardroom doors opened. Ethan Brooks entered without fanfare. The room fell silent. He wore the same charcoal blazer, the same calm expression. But the air shifted when he took his seat. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply arrives, and everything else adjusts. Richard dimmed the lights. The video began. No one spoke as it played. Not a cough, not a shuffle. When it ended, the silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. I'm not here for apologies, Ethan said finally. His voice was steady, controlled, carrying easily across the room. I've heard enough of those in my life. Richard swallowed. Mr. Brooks. As the largest individual shareholder in this company, Ethan continued, cutting him off without raising his voice, I'm here to make 2 decisions. He held up one finger. First, everyone involved in this incident is terminated. Effective immediately. Nods around the table. No objections. Second, Ethan said, lifting another finger, Nova Core Technologies is cancelling all pending contracts with Aerolux Airlines. A murmur rippled through the room. The CFO leaned forward, face pale. "That contract is worth $50 million, he said. "We need that partnership to modernize our systems." "I know," Ethan said. "That's why it matters." Richard cleared his throat. Perhaps suspensions would. Ethan placed his hands flat on the table. The sound was soft, final. "This isn't negotiable," he said. "Accountability or collapse. Choose." The door burst open. A young analyst rushed in, breathless, tablet in hand. "Sir," he said, voice cracking, "the stock just dropped another 8%. Analysts are reacting to the board meeting rumors." Richard looked at Ethan. The truth settled in fully now. This wasn't about damage control. This was about survival. "We accept," Richard said quietly. Ethan nodded. "Good." In the auditorium downstairs, employees gathered, confusion buzzing through the crowd. When Richard stepped onto the stage beside Ethan, the room fell quiet. "Today," Richard began, "Aerolux Airlines failed." He spoke of values, of responsibility, of systemic change. He announced a 48-hour company-wide shutdown for mandatory bias training. Gasps echoed through the room. In an industry where minutes cost millions, this was unprecedented. Ethan stepped forward. "This isn't about punishing individuals," he said. "It's about fixing a system that thought it could decide who belonged based on appearances. What happened to me happens to people without my resources every day." The room listened. Starting now, Ethan continued. "We change that." Weeks later, the consequences rippled outward. Aerolux rewrote policies, implemented zero-tolerance guidelines. Independent auditors verified progress. Passengers noticed the difference. The invisible hierarchy began to dissolve. Daniel Ross sat alone in his apartment, rejection emails piling up. Lauren Mitchell faced interviews that ended the moment recognition dawned. Captain Turner packed away his uniform for the last time. Victoria Hale watched her name scroll across news broadcasts, labeled, analyzed, judged. Her company placed her on administrative leave. Friends stopped calling. The seat she'd fought for became a symbol of everything she'd lost. And Ethan Brooks watched it all from a distance, not with satisfaction, but with resolve. Justice, he knew, wasn't loud. It was precise. And it had only just begun. The 48-hour shutdown hit the airline like a controlled detonation. Flights cancelled, lounges dark, gates silent. The terminals, usually a river of movement, slowed to a crawl as announcements echoed with apologies that felt thin against the weight of what had happened. Travelers complained. Analysts speculated. Employees gathered in conference rooms that smelled of recycled air and anxiety, waiting to be told who they were now. Ethan Brooks watched the rollout from a quiet office overlooking the city. Morning light slid across the table where reports stacked in neat columns. Independent auditors, training outlines, policy drafts marked in red. He read everything. He always had. He believed that systems revealed themselves in the margins. In Chicago, Dallas, Los Angeles, and Atlanta, Aerolux employees sat through the first sessions of mandatory training. No slogans, no glossy videos, just scenarios, decisions, consequences. A facilitator would pause the room and ask a single question. "Why did you assume that?" Silence followed. Then discomfort. Then slowly, recognition. In one room, a baggage supervisor crossed his arms and stared at the floor. "I never thought of myself as biased," he said. "I just followed patterns." The facilitator nodded. Patterns are bias when you don't question them. Across the country, a senior flight attendant stared at a still frame from the viral video. Ethan's face, calm, framed by uniforms and authority. "I would have told him to move," she said quietly. Without thinking, the facilitator didn't argue. That's the point. At headquarters, Richard Coleman walked the halls without his jacket, sleeves rolled up, the costume of control stripped away. He stopped at doorways, listened, took notes he never used to take. For the first time in years, the company wasn't talking about brand. It was talking about people. Ethan joined sessions unannounced. No entourage. No speech prepared. He stood at the back and listened. When he spoke, it was measured, deliberate. "This isn't about me," he said in one room. "If it were, this would be easy. It's about the next person who won't have a camera, or shares, or leverage. It's about who you become when no one important is watching." Some nodded. Some bristled. He expected both. Outside the company bubble, the world reacted in waves. Opinion pieces argued whether the response went too far or not far enough. Late-night hosts joked until they didn't. Churches held forums. College classrooms replayed the footage, pausing on frames where power leaned forward and silence chose a side. Ethan declined interviews. He didn't need to speak. The work spoke for him. In a modest apartment across town, Daniel Ross sat at his kitchen table, rejection emails open on his laptop. He read one slowly, then another. Professional language, carefully worded. Final. He closed the laptop and stared at the wall. The memory replayed without mercy. The way he'd said discretion. The way he'd smiled. The certainty he'd felt then evaporated now. He thought about the training he'd skimmed years ago. The complaints he'd dismissed as misunderstandings. The quiet ease of power. He opened a notebook and wrote one sentence. "I was wrong." He stared at it for a long time. Lauren Mitchell stood on a crowded platform, waiting for a train she'd never taken before. The uniform was gone. The confidence, too. She watched people move past her, invisible in a way she'd never experienced. Her phone buzzed with a message from a regional airline recruiter. "We've decided to pursue other candidates." She remembered the feel of the cash in her pocket, the heat in her cheeks, the moment she'd chosen ease over integrity. She swallowed and lifted her chin as the train arrived, doors opening with a hiss that sounded like judgment. Captain Michael Turner sat on his porch, a mug cooling in his hands. He had flown through storms that rattled bones and faith. He had trusted instruments, trusted hierarchy. He thought of the second he could have slowed everything down, asked a question, looked closer. He hadn't. The sky had been kinder than he deserved. People had not. Victoria Hale watched the news in a room too quiet. Her phone lay face down, untouched. She saw herself on screen, checking her watch, lips thin with contempt. She barely recognized the woman. Or maybe she did, and that was the problem. The ban from Aerolux was permanent. The leave from her company indefinite. Friends had learned to be busy. She reached for her watch and stopped, left it on the table. 6 weeks later, Aerolux released its first public audit. Metrics improved, complaints fell, satisfaction scores climbed, uneven at first, then steadier. For the first time, demographic data showed parity. The report didn't celebrate. It stated. Ethan read it twice. He approved the next phase. Nova Core engineers deployed new systems quietly. Bias detection embedded into customer service flows. Alerts triggered not for noise, but for patterns. Decisions flagged. Reviews required. The machines did what humans avoided. They remembered. At a town hall streamed to every employee, Richard stood beside Ethan, shoulders squared but humble now. "We didn't lose our way," Richard said. "We never learned it." Ethan spoke last. "Change isn't comfortable," he said. "If it feels easy, it isn't real." Applause rose, hesitant, then firm. Months passed. The shutdown became a case study. Business schools taught it without names at first, then with them. The footage became less shocking, more instructive. That was progress. Ethan founded a program quietly. The Second Chance Initiative. Not a headline. A pathway. Training for people who had failed publicly and wanted to learn privately. Accountability first, then work. Not everyone qualified. Not everyone finished. Daniel applied. He was accepted. The first session was brutal. No defenses allowed. No minimizing language. He spoke about his upbringing, the jokes he'd normalized, the shortcuts he'd taken. He listened to others who sounded uncomfortably familiar. He learned to sit with shame without letting it calcify into bitterness. Lauren applied too. She cried during the intake interview and apologized without asking for forgiveness. She learned to speak up when her voice shook. She learned that silence was a decision. Captain Turner volunteered to mentor. He couldn't fly commercially again, but he could teach. He stood in front of rooms and told the truth. "Authority is borrowed," he said, "and it can be taken back." Ethan watched the program grow from a distance. He didn't attend every session. He trusted the structure. He trusted the work. One evening, he stood at a window overlooking a runway, lights blinking in careful order. Planes moved like promises kept. He thought about Seat 2A, about how small the moment had seemed, about how large it had become. Justice, he knew now, wasn't a spike. It was a slope, and they were still climbing. 6 months after the incident, the numbers told a story no press release ever could. Passenger volume up 12%. Complaint rates down across every demographic. Employee retention higher than it had been in a decade. The charts didn't spike. They climbed. Steady. Earned. Ethan Brooks stood in a quiet corridor at Aerolux headquarters, watching employees move between meetings. The energy was different now. Less performative. More alert. People made eye contact. They paused to listen. Small things, but small things had always been the point. Richard Coleman joined him, holding a thin folder. He looked older than he had 6 months ago. not weaker, just changed. The kind of aging that comes from finally seeing clearly. The latest audit, Richard said, handing it over. Independent, no edits. Ethan flipped through it. He didn't rush. He never rushed when it mattered. "You're leading the industry," he said finally. Richard nodded. "We should have been from the start." Ethan closed the folder. "Most people don't change because they want to," he said. "They change because they have to. What matters is what they do after." Down the hall, a group of new hires gathered around a facilitator. They were young, nervous, hopeful. One of them glanced at Ethan, then back to the facilitator, unsure if he was allowed to stare. "You can ask," the facilitator said gently. The young man cleared his throat. "Is it true," he asked, "that the CEO got kicked off a plane?" A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the group, not mocking, not cruel, curious. Ethan stepped forward. "Yes," he said. "It's true." The room went still. "And it mattered," he continued. "Not because of who I am, because of what it showed." The facilitator smiled and let the moment land. Across the city, in a modest training center, Daniel Ross stood in front of a whiteboard, hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't leading yet. He was observing, listening. The Second Chance initiative had stripped him down and rebuilt him slowly, painfully, honestly. A woman in the group spoke through tears. "I thought being polite meant I was fair," she said. "I didn't realize how often I chose convenience over dignity." Daniel nodded. He understood now. He had lived there. Lauren Mitchell worked the early shift at a regional airport, loading bags onto carts under a pale sunrise. The work was hard, physical, anonymous. She welcomed it. It didn't ask her to smile through discomfort. It asked her to show up. When a new hire hesitated before a family struggling with luggage, Lauren spoke up. "I've got it, this support," she said, stepping in without hesitation. Her voice didn't shake anymore. Captain Michael Turner stood at the front of a classroom filled with recruits. He no longer wore stripes. He wore a plain jacket and a voice sharpened by regret. "You will be tempted to move fast," he told them, "to trust rank over reality. Don't. Slow down. Ask the second question. The first one lies." Hands rose. They listened. Victoria Hale sat alone at a small cafe table, stirring a drink she didn't want. The city moved around her, indifferent. She had been forced into stillness, into seeing herself without mirrors. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't quick. She didn't like who she saw yet. But she was looking. The world moved on as it always did, but the imprint remained. Airlines called Aerolux, asking how they'd turned it around. Consultants wrote frameworks. Panels debated language. None of it captured the truth. The truth lived in moments, in a flight attendant pausing before speaking, in a supervisor choosing explanation over command, in a passenger feeling seen without needing proof. Ethan returned to his office late one evening, the city dark and wide beneath him. He stood at the window, hands in his pockets, watching planes lift into the night. Each one carried 100 stories. Most would never be told. His phone buzzed. Message from Elena. Final report approved. Investments reinstated. Ethan typed back a single word. Good. He thought about the first time he'd been underestimated. The last time. How the line between them had blurred. Power, he had learned, wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself with threats or uniforms. It revealed itself in who was protected and who was expendable. He turned from the window and shut off the lights. Tomorrow, another flight would board. Another seat would be taken. Another choice would be made, quietly, without cameras. That was where the real story lived. And this time, the system was watching too. The first time Ethan Brooks flew Aerolux again, he boarded like any other passenger. No announcement, no escort, just a boarding pass, scanned with a soft beep and a nod from a gate agent who didn't know his name. That mattered to him more than recognition ever could. He walked down the jet bridge at an unhurried pace, the familiar scent of recycled air and coffee drifting toward him. The aircraft door stood open, light spilling across the threshold. A flight attendant smiled and greeted him, not warmly, not cautiously, just professionally. It was the kind of interaction that left no mark. That was the point. Seat 2. A was empty. Ethan paused for a fraction of a second, then continued past it. He took his assigned seat farther back, window side, mid-cabin. He stowed his bag, sat, buckled in. Around him, people settled into their routines. A man adjusted his glasses and opened a newspaper. A woman across the aisle scrolled through photos of her grandchildren. Somewhere up front, champagne corks popped softly. No one looked twice at Ethan. As the plane pushed back from the gate, he felt the familiar vibration beneath his feet, the low rumble that always came just before lift. He closed his eyes briefly, not out of fatigue, but memory. The sound carried weight now. Context. The plane climbed smoothly, banking toward open sky. When the seatbelt sign clicked off, the cabin exhaled as one. A flight attendant approached with a tray. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked. "Water, please," Ethan said. She handed it to him without comment, without hesitation. Full cup, no plastic half measure. She moved on. Ethan watched her go, then looked out the window. The city below receded into pattern and geometry. People reduced to dots, systems laid bare. This was what change looked like when it worked. Quiet, uneventful, invisible. In another part of the country, a conference room filled slowly with airline executives from half a dozen carriers. They had come for a closed-door session, titled simply, Operational Equity Review. No press, no cameras, just charts, case studies, and uncomfortable questions. Ethan stood at the front, not elevated, not framed, just present. "I'm not here to sell you software," he said. "You can buy that anywhere. I'm here to talk about cost." A hand rose. "Cost in terms of lawsuits?" someone asked. Ethan shook his head. "Cost in trust." The room went still. "You can recover from a bad quarter," he continued. "You can't recover from being seen clearly and found lacking. The public doesn't forget what systems reveal about themselves." A man in the back leaned forward. So what's the answer? Ethan didn't hesitate. Slow down your authority. Speed up your accountability. Pens moved. Screens glowed. Some nodded. Some resisted. All listened. At the Second Chance Initiative, the latest cohort finished their final session. No applause, no ceremony. Just a circle of chairs and quiet resolve. Daniel Ross sat straighter now. Not redeemed, rebuilt. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't offer excuses. I used to think leadership meant control, he said. Now I think it means interruption. Stopping the moment before harm becomes policy. No one clapped. Several nodded. Lauren Mitchell received her certificate weeks later. She didn't frame it. She kept it in a drawer, a reminder rather than a trophy. She worked another shift, lifted another bag, stepped in when someone hesitated. That was enough. Captain Michael Turner watched from the back of a classroom as a trainee paused during a role-play scenario. Let's check the policy, the trainee said, resisting pressure to rush. Michael smiled, just slightly. Victoria Hale didn't reappear in headlines. Her story didn't arc cleanly. It lingered. She attended a community forum one evening, sat in the back, listened without speaking. No one recognized her. She stayed anyway. Ethan read about it later and said nothing. Years passed the way years do, unevenly. The viral video faded into archives, referenced occasionally, then academically, then historically. New scandals replaced old ones. Attention moved on. But inside Aerolux, the systems held. Alerts flagged patterns. Supervisors intervened early. Employees reported concerns without fear. Passengers noticed without knowing why. Ethan's investment grew quietly. So did his distance from the day that started it all. He no longer replayed the moment in the aisle. He no longer needed to. One evening, he received a handwritten note. No return address, just a few lines. I was on that flight. I didn't speak up. I should have. I'm trying to now. He folded the note and placed it in a drawer with others like it. He didn't keep them for validation. He kept them for scale. On another flight, years later, a young man boarded and paused at his seat, confusion crossing his face. A flight attendant stepped in, calm, clear, respectful. The issue resolved in seconds. No raised voices, no eyes on phones. Ethan watched from 2 rows back. No one noticed him watching. The plane took off on time. As it climbed, Ethan felt something settle in him. Not triumph, not closure. Something quieter. Continuity. Change, he knew, wasn't about the moment when power shifted. It was about the long stretch afterward, when no one was watching, and choices still mattered. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the hum of the engines carry him forward. There were still systems that needed breaking, and still people willing to pretend they didn't exist. But now, there were structures in place that remembered what had happened, and that was enough to keep going. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that rarely announces anything important. Ethan Brooks was reviewing a quarterly report when his assistant paused at the door, hand resting lightly on the frame. "There's a woman here to see you," she said. "No appointment. She says you won't recognize the name, but you'll remember the moment." Ethan didn't look up right away. "Send her in," he said. Victoria Hale stepped into the office without the armor she used to wear. No tailored suit, no watch. Just a simple coat folded over her arm, hair pulled back without precision. She stood there for a second, uncertain, like someone who had rehearsed every word and then forgotten them all. Ethan gestured to the chair across from him. "Have a seat." She did. Carefully. "I didn't come for forgiveness," Victoria said quickly, as if afraid the silence would swallow her courage. "I know that's not mine to ask for." Ethan studied her face, the tension around her eyes, the absence of entitlement that had once filled every gesture. "Then why are you here?" he asked. She swallowed. "Because I finally understood something," she said. And understanding without doing anything felt like another form of harm. She took a breath. "I grew up believing the world worked a certain way. That comfort was earned by people like me, and inconvenience belonged to everyone else. I never questioned it. Not until it cost me everything I thought defined me." Ethan didn't interrupt. "I've been volunteering," she continued. Quietly, listening more than speaking. And I realized how often people like me mistake access for merit. I wanted you to know that I see it now. Not just what I did to you, what I've done my whole life. The room held the weight of it. Ethan leaned back slightly. "Seeing it is a start," he said. "But starts don't erase impact." "I know," Victoria said. Her voice didn't waver. "I'm not asking you to make this lighter for me." She stood. "I just didn't want to disappear without saying that." Ethan nodded once. "Thank you for coming." She paused at the door. "I hope your work keeps going," she said. "Even when people like me stop being part of the story." After she left, Ethan sat still for a long moment. He didn't feel vindicated. He didn't feel relieved. He felt something closer to clarity. Elsewhere, the Second Chance initiative reached a crossroads. Funding had doubled. Applications tripled. The demand was outpacing the structure. Eleanor laid out the options, each with trade-offs. "We can scale," she said. "Or we can protect the integrity of the process." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Protect it," he said. "Growth that forgets why it exists becomes the thing it was built to fix." Daniel Ross listened from the far end of the table. He was no longer a participant. He was staff now. Quiet, effective, trusted, but not elevated. He had learned to measure progress differently. "I'll take the overflow cases," Daniel said. "The ones no one wants." Ethan met his eyes. "You don't get redemption points for suffering," he said. "You get responsibility." Daniel nodded. "That's enough." Lauren Mitchell sent an email from her break room late one night. "Just a note, no attachment, no ask. I spoke up today. It didn't cost me my job. It felt strange." "Right. I thought you should know." Ethan read it once, then archived it. Not erased. Archived. At Aerolux, a new internal report landed on Richard Coleman's desk. Anomalies flagged. A supervisor who consistently reassigned seats under vague pretenses. No viral video. No public pressure, just a pattern. Richard called the supervisor in, asked questions, acted early. The supervisor was retrained, not terminated. Monitored, supported. The behavior stopped. No one outside the company ever knew. That mattered more than headlines. In a community center outside Baltimore, Captain Michael Turner stood beside a group of teenagers enrolled in an aviation pathway program. He pointed to a diagram of an aircraft cabin. "Every system looks neutral on paper," he said, "until a human uses it." One of the students raised her hand. What if the human doesn't know they're doing harm? Michael didn't answer right away. "Then it's the system's job to slow them down," he said, "and the human's job to listen." The student nodded. She wrote it down. Ethan traveled less now. When he did, he flew without preference. He watched interactions the way an architect studies stress points. He noticed pauses, corrections, the absence of fear. On one flight, a man argued loudly over a seat. A flight attendant responded calmly, firmly, citing policy without judgment. The issue resolved. The cabin exhaled. Ethan felt a quiet satisfaction, not pride, alignment. He received an invitation to speak at a national summit on transportation ethics. He declined. Sent a replacement instead. A mid-level manager from Aerolux who had changed quietly and deeply. "Why not you?" Elena asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "Because the story can't stay about me." The summit went on without him. It was better for it. That night, Ethan stood on his balcony. The city spread below him in lights and lines. He thought about the first moment on that plane. The weight of eyes. The certainty of dismissal. The way it could have ended smaller. He understood now that moments don't create systems. Systems create moments. And systems, once exposed, could be rewritten. The work was slower now, less dramatic, more necessary. He turned back inside, shutting the door on the noise of the city. Tomorrow, another report would arrive, another decision, another chance to get it right without applause. That was the measure. That was enough. The first real test came without warning, as real tests always do. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't trend. It didn't come with cameras or outrage. It arrived as an internal alert at Aerolux at 7:20 in the morning, flagged by a system most employees had already stopped thinking about because it worked quietly in the background. Pattern anomaly detected. Repeated discretionary seat reassignments. Supervisor level. Richard Coleman read the report twice, then a third time. Names, dates, routes, no raised voices, no complaints filed. Just a consistent pattern of exceptions applied to the same type of passenger, and never to others. A year earlier, this would have been ignored, rationalized, deferred. Richard picked up the phone. "Bring her in," he said. The supervisor, a woman in her early 40s with an impeccable performance record, sat across from him less than an hour later. She looked confused, not defensive. That mattered. "I don't understand," she said, hands folded. "I've never had a complaint." Richard slid the report toward her. "That's why we're here, before there is one." She read silently. Her brow furrowed. I was just trying to keep things running smoothly, she said. Some passengers are louder, and some are quieter, Richard replied. Which ones did you move? She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was lower. I didn't realize it added up like that. It always does, Richard said. She wasn't fired. She wasn't shamed. She was retrained, monitored, supported. The pattern stopped. The system held. Ethan heard about it weeks later, buried in a routine update. He paused when he read it, then continued on. That pause was the proof. At Nova Corps, the engineers celebrated nothing. They refined. They tweaked thresholds. They debated edge cases latency, Defiance into the night, not because anyone demanded it, but because they understood the stakes now. Bias wasn't loud. It was cumulative. Daniel Ross led a session at the Second Chance Initiative for a group that didn't trust him yet. He expected that. He didn't try to learn it. I don't want you to like me, he said. I want you to recognize yourselves in the choices I made. A man in the back crossed his arms. And what if I don't? Then you're not ready, Daniel said. That's not a punishment. It's a pause. Some walked out. Some stayed. The program didn't bend to keep its numbers up. It never had. Lauren Mitchell got promoted quietly, not to the cabin, to a training role on the ground. She didn't announce it. She didn't post about it. She showed up early and left late. When a new hire hesitated to challenge a supervisor, Lauren told her story without drama. I thought silence was safer, she said. It wasn't. Captain Michael Turner attended a retirement ceremony for another pilot and stood in the back. When asked if he missed flying, he smiled thinly. I miss being useful, he said. Then he returned to teaching. Victoria Hale wrote a letter she never sent. She rewrote it 5 times. Each version sounded like a performance. She tore them all up. She stopped trying to control how accountability looked. Ethan received fewer messages now, fewer thank yous, fewer confessions. The work had moved past novelty. That was the goal. One evening, he attended a small dinner with transportation regulators. No speeches, no spotlight, just conversation. A commissioner leaned toward him midway through the meal. We're drafting new guidance, she said. Industry-wide. Ethan nodded. Good. Your case changed the timeline, she added. It wasn't my case, Ethan said. It was everyone else's before it had my name on it. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. At an airport in Ohio, a family boarded a flight late, flustered and apologetic. Their seats were scattered. A gate agent took a breath, looked at the screen, and made a different choice than she would have a year ago. She asked questions. She explained options. She didn't rush them out of sight. The flight departed 3 minutes late. No one complained. In a college classroom, a professor paused a lecture and asked, "What would you have done differently?" Students debated policy, ethics, incentives. One student raised her hand. "I would have slowed everything down," she said. "They acted like seed mattered more than people." The professor smiled. Speed often hides values. Ethan sat alone in his office late one night, lights low, city quiet. He reread the original incident report for the first time in months. The language felt foreign now, the justifications thin. He closed the file and deleted it. Not erased, archived. He thought about how easily the story could have gone another way, how often it still did, unseen. Change didn't announce itself with victory. It showed up in vigilance, in the unglamorous choice to keep watching when no one else was. His phone buzzed with a message from Elena. Audit complete. No regression. Ethan typed back, "Keep monitoring." He stood and looked out at the darkened runway beyond the city. Planes rose and fell, lights blinking in practiced rhythm. Each one carried systems inside systems. Each one relied on thousands of decisions no one would ever notice unless they failed. Justice, he had learned, wasn't a moment you reached. It was a posture you maintained. Tomorrow would bring another alert, another conversation, another quiet correction that never made the news. That was how it was supposed to work, and that was how he knew they were finally doing it right. The morning Ethan Brooks finally let himself slow down, the city looked different. Not brighter, not cleaner, just quieter in the way that comes after a long storm when nothing dramatic happens, and that alone feels earned. He stood by the window of his office, coffee cooling in his hand, watching traffic inch forward below, each car staying in its lane, each driver trusting that the system would hold long enough to get them home. Nova Corps no longer needed him in every meeting. Aerolux no longer needed him in every decision. That had always been the goal. Systems that worked without spectacle. Accountability that didn't require a witness. Eleanor stepped in with a slim folder. "Final integration report," she said. "All benchmarks met. No outstanding flags." Ethan took it, skimmed the summary, then closed it without reading the rest. "Archive it," he said. "We don't need to revisit this unless something breaks." She smiled. "That's a good sign." "It's the only sign that matters," he replied. Across the country, a morning flight lifted off smoothly, passengers settling in without incident. A flight attendant paused before responding to a demanding request, chose her words carefully, explained policy without apology or aggression. The passenger nodded, dissatisfied but compliant. The moment passed. No one recorded it. No one remembered it. The system absorbed the friction and moved on. In a training center, Daniel Ross ended a session early. The group didn't need more words that day. They needed space to sit with what they'd learned. As they filed out, one man lingered. "I used to think accountability was punishment," the man said quietly. "Now I think it's direction." Daniel nodded. "It's both," he said, "but only one of them builds anything." Lauren Mitchell clocked out after a long shift and stood for a moment in the empty hallway, listening to the echo of carts and distant announcements. She remembered the woman she'd been, the choices she'd made quickly without reflection. She remembered how easy it had felt then. She preferred the weight of awareness now. It slowed her down. It made her better. Captain Michael Turner erased a whiteboard after class, leaving only one sentence written small in the corner. "Authority without reflection becomes harm." He left it there for the next group. Victoria Hale walked past an airport she no longer flew out of, rolling a suitcase that didn't belong to her. She watched families hurry, business travelers check their phones, gate agents scan boarding passes with practiced efficiency. She kept walking. Some lessons stayed with you longer when no one was watching. Ethan's phone buzzed once more that afternoon. A message from a mid-level manager at Aerolux he'd never met in person. "We stopped something small today. No issue. Just wanted you to know the system caught it, and we listened." Ethan stared at the screen for a moment, then set the phone face down. He didn't respond. Not because it didn't matter, but because it didn't need reinforcement. The work wasn't about him anymore. As evening settled, he left the office and walked instead of calling a car. He passed storefronts, overheard fragments of conversation, felt the city breathe around him. Somewhere, someone was being underestimated. Somewhere else, someone was choosing not to act on it. The distance between those two moments was the measure of progress. He thought back to seat 2A. The leather, the silence, the certainty in other people's eyes that he did not belong. He realized he could remember it now without feeling the tightness in his chest. The memory had changed shape. It had become context, not weight. Power, he had learned, didn't reveal itself when things went well. It revealed itself in who was protected when they didn't. Dignity wasn't granted by status. It was preserved by systems designed to expect humanity, not exception. That night, a documentary crew requested an interview. He declined. A publisher asked for a book. He passed. The story had done its work. Turning it into a brand would only shrink it. Instead, he sat at his kitchen table and wrote a single page, not for an audience, not for history, but for himself. It wasn't about the airline, or the video, or the consequences. It was about a moment when he chose not to move, and how many people moved because of it. He folded the page and placed it in a drawer. Some things didn't need to be shared to matter. Outside, a plane crossed the night sky, lights blinking in steady rhythm. No turbulence, no drama, just motion, guided by systems most people would never think about, unless they failed. Ethan turned off the lights and let the quiet settle. And if this story stayed with you, if it made you think about the moments where systems meet people, take a second to show your support. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts by commenting 3 simple words: justice over silence.